Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And now for the last of our year-end list, the top 50 best albums of 2024. I've described this list for many years now as a professional obligation, normally because I have to have a significant chunk of it finalized in the end of the year in order to submit my Uprocks ballot, is where I dress up a little bit and try to be somewhat businesslike in assessing the most weighty list of the year, the one that inevitably attracts the most attention, well, from my peers. And yet, something felt a little bit easier this year. I know it's late, shut up, but I was on vacation, and it's also kind of tough to pin down what it is. Maybe it's how individual songs occupied more of my personal attention, so the album order fell out more quickly. Maybe it's feeling more secure than ever where my opinions might lie in a more stable mental space. Or hell, maybe it's the feeling that my list feels completely detached from anything close to resembling my peers, where the overlap is incidental at best. You know what, I'll spoil this now. Brat is not on this list. Neither is Cowboy Carter, nor Short and Sweet, nor Hit Me Hard and Soft. And while you think it might just be about pop and me being outside the norm, you're also not going to see any Cindy Lee, or MJ Lenderman, or Waxahachie, or Mount Erie, or Vampire Weekend. Now, the last of which should be absolutely no surprise to anyone with sense coming from me, but there are more critics that have at least one of the acts or albums that I just mentioned in comparison with the critics who don't have any of them. Again, it felt like a year where, compared to a lot of my peers, I was somewhat on the outside looking in, and there is of course going to be some major overlap, but maybe a little bit less than you might think. And you know, I think some of that comes with assessing what genres did well for me this year, where for as much as I will champion hip-hop, not all of my choices are going to overlap with the obvious consensus, and that's even more true with country and folk music. And while I was much more lukewarm on pop in 2024 in comparison with a lot of critics, the genres that overperformed beyond any expectation for me was rock and metal. The heavier genres really pulled up their weight in a way I did not see coming, especially after a pretty lousy 2023. And that's not even counting some of the weirder swerves you might see on this list, which personally maybe is not quite as diverse or exploratory as I'd love to see overall. But with bandwidth now firmly kicking into gear and a busy enough schedule, I think things are, well, looking up. And one thing I will add is that while there wasn't an obvious immediate standout for my number one, and that if I do a best albums of the 2020s, there's probably going to be multiple shifts within this list. Please do not take the order of it that seriously. It doesn't reflect a lack of quality so much as just really intense competition. We'll see what stands the test of time. But with all that being said, prepare yourself for a bit of a strange list, but starting on a rather conventional or maybe even predictable note.
1,000 years or more, and I've never seen this face, never heard this voice before.
Okay, fine. I think I get Adrienne Lenker a little bit more now. And all it took was her embracing country in a way that Big Thief has been steadily trending, but Lenker was finally able to stick the landing by delivering more tangible emotional stakes, tighter compositions, and an optimistic thematic through line that I felt was desperately needed. It's the sort of album I didn't really revisit much throughout 2024, but I was always pleasantly surprised when I did. The music feels more lived in, the sense of space and relationships balanced out with more immediate song structures, more refinement than an outright reinvention from her. But you can also argue that was all Lenker really needed in order to get on this list. So it's an excellent little project. But while we're in the topic of homespun female singer-songwriters,
so who would rush right through it, child of mine, child of mine, child of mine.
part of me is a bit hesitant and thinking that this might be a shade low, that when I eventually have children, this is going to wind up a lot higher based on the very domestic framing of family, and Laura Marling's impeccable delivery, utterly heart-wrenching songs, but it's also balanced out by the fact that Laurie McKenna will probably experience something similar beyond her already usual high placement, and Laura Marling's catalog shows the height she can reach. As it is, I would not put this among Once I Was an Eagle or I Speak Because I Can in terms of of her best, but in the gentle, more directly realized and expanded arrangements coming from songs for our daughter, Laura Marling captured the patterns of messy familial history with this elegant poise and genuine warmth. Of many albums on my list, I can see this having a lot of replay in the years ahead. Small stakes until they feel like the world. This is special. And now, in precisely the opposite corner, we have some J-rock inspired black metal with riffs for days and lyrics you can't remotely take seriously because of how gory and blood-soaked the entire experience is. I can't deny that Saidan might feel a little bit one-dimensional when it comes to black metal ear candy. In particular, I would love for them to develop a more credible groove section, or maybe have the edgy subject matter feel a bit more grounded with some proper melodic contrast. But hey, when the riffs are this fun, it's really hard to complain. Okay, look, take the placement of this album with a grain of salt. I am not a death metal fan. I've been saying it for years, and I was late to Bloody Incantation to begin with. I know this is getting a lot of critical acclaim in 2024, mostly because of its progressive rock and metal leanings, which have aggravated some of the death metal purists. Kind of reminds me a bit of what Tomb Mold did last year. I go back and forth on who stuck the landing more, especially as Tomb Mold very narrowly missed that list in 2023. But look, the shredding is excellent. The production feels immense and really melodic. The abrupt transitions and rather rote observations of more psychedelic transcendence, they hold it back a little bit for me from being higher on this list, but as a metal fan from other genres, I know how basic it looks for me to put Blood Incantation here. I also know that it kicks too much ass to overthink it, and if a death metal album makes my list, you got something special. An extremely late addition onto this list, but I think it's extremely deserving. I found Kit Sebastian on my streaming series Bandwidth, and I was immediately struck by their genre fusion of vintage psychedelic rock, French jazz, and percussion that was being pulled from all over Eastern Europe and Turkey. And that was before I translated the lyrics to find a strikingly romantic and surprisingly political record that understands that with international framing and the blending of their aesthetic, they wind up embracing revolutionary subtext and text pretty much by birthright, especially given the state of their part of the world. This is one of the most flavorful albums of 2024, one of my favorite incidental finds, especially on Bandwidth. You're not going to hear anything else quite like it. You should hear it.
The way we fight for bitter ends, we tear the night into.
I feel like I'm surrendering some of my goth cred for not putting this higher on my list. Sorry, Mike C-Town, I certainly get it for you with this one. But quite frankly, I don't think anyone was expecting Robert Smith and The Cure to deliver their best album since the early 90s. The sort of comeback where I'm kind of astounded how much all this sticks to the landing. From Robert Smith's voice barely aging to the excellent focus on groove and smoldering guitar textures that recall a lot of my favorite albums from The Cure, to the writing that can feel a little unadorned but doesn't require many words in order to express the heartache of aging, the fraught relationships, and the loss of family. It's where hearing rumors that The Cure might have more music that they could release kind of leaves me in a strange place, because this is such a great finale that I'm honestly kind of unsure if I need to hear more from The Cure. But as it is, I never would have expected it, but I can tell how much it matters that we got it.
Came in on my own, 2 feet might fail me, but I won't lose. I came in on my own, 2 feet might fail me, but I won't lose.
Yeah, Yes, I know, it's an EP. My rules have always been that EPs can qualify for this list, and if Ethel Cain is calling Perverts and all of its 90 plus minutes an extended play, a blisteringly sharp 4 songs here absolutely qualifies. If anything, it's kind of frustrating that POS and Sims didn't bucket both the EPs together as just a full 8-song album, until you realize that Close Cuts is absolutely the better 4 songs, with a sort of ragged, hard-hitting rap that feels perpetually desperate and on the edge. Not quite reinventing the wheel from them. I'd be higher if it felt like more the political barbs landed more effectively. We'll get to the albums where that was absolutely the case in the meantime, but this group can write hooks and create visceral, quotable images for days. I'll stick by it.
Down on my knees, crying out, please, Lord, release us. We survey your rugged cross. Don't do us like Jesus.
Didn't have to wait too long for that now, did you? Now here, it's a little bit frustrating because I eventually mostly came around on the louder, more urgent production from Butch Walker, even if I would prefer a little bit more subtlety in order to accentuate Adeem the artist's excellent writing and delivery. I still don't love some of the experimentation and the very dark and downbeat ending of the project, which might feel kind of prophetic and not the only album to feel that way, but it doesn't exactly make for a lot of easy replay. But given this has had a bit of success outside of the critical acclaim, I don't think Adeem the artist is complaining. And it is still an excellent country rock singer-songwriter project. Certainly more cutting than it's been getting credit. I'm still gonna recommend it. Oh, you thought we were done with the politics. Well, here's Chat Pile with the sophomore album that I actually think outstrips God's Country in the grimy and crushing genre fusion, with tighter compositions and a horrifying thematic focus on the grisly cost of war, pummeling riffs splitting the difference between nu metal, post-punk, and the truly bleakest sides of 90s grunge, paired with writing that takes a dirty razor blade to American late capitalism, imperialism, and machismo, only then to film it from every angle, all which feels punishingly bleak and haunted. Yeah, I can nitpick some of the production choices, but Chat Pile were able to tap into the creaking muck and misery of late 2024 more effectively than I think anyone wanted, and again, really didn't wish it felt so prophetic.
Now he ain't but a prayer away from one more Sunday drive. We took a ride around heaven last night.
No jokes here. After the first 2 listens of this album, I walked to the nearby record store that morning and asked if they had a CD copy of the album. They didn't. I'm asking for mainstream country in a Canadian record store. I'd be better off going to Walmart. But I went home and ordered a copy all the same, and while it came a little bit too late for Father's Day, it was exactly what I gave my dad. That also happened to coincide with probably Luke Combs' best writing to date, taking a very plain-spoken, neo-traditional, and remarkably nuanced view of the relationship between fathers and sons across multiple generations, where if Chat Pile was more critiquing machismo, Luke Combs was able to highlight, well, the unique positive sides that come with masculinity. This album was always great. It did not get the attention it really deserved, especially from Nashville, but on the basis of that connection and that experience, it wasn't gonna miss this list. And it deserves it as much as anything else.
Wake up, A cup, get your tits sucked in my makeup, face fuck, get your bake up, fake bluff, fake tough, niggas dick suck, put your 6 up for the motherfucking princess, rates up, jigs up, put your dicks up, get your dick sucked, put your motherfucking sticks up, they suck, that's tough, nigga, pay up, get your rates up for the motherfucking princess.
This might wind up a bigger surprise than it made my list altogether, but if there was a project that grew on me the past couple of months, mostly through a lot of plays at the gym, it was this, where Doechii flexes her versatility as a rapper and and singer with a kooky sense of humor, a surprising number of strong hooks, and an insight on the come-up where she's quite frankly honest enough to admit her vices and how they've messed up her life, but also how much genuine fun she's having with said vices in the meantime. It's more of a stylistic showcase than a fully cohesive project. Ending's a little bit shaky. I get why the branding is of a mixtape than a proper album, knowing that she's on TDE, but if this is just a tape, given that her rise seems to be really kicking into gear, get Top on the phone, because Doechii has momentum now, and given that I've been a fan for over 2.5 years already, really nice to see.
I wanna be smarter than I am, but if I get smarter, well, I wanna be smarter than I am. I wanna be smarter than I am, but if I get smarter, what then? Huh?
This was another bandwidth surprise for me, and easily one of my best comfort listens of the entire year. The expert gives NAHreally a selection of short, but pretty well considered production, and it's paired with an MC who can match that plain-spoken, but deceptively clever and real populist energy. An album where thinking and living your rhymes is both the strident metatext and underpinning so many charming little jokes and wit. It's the sort of album that is so defiantly unflashy about its presentation that the title might be too self-effacing for its own damn good. I know this flew under a lot of folks' radars this year, but you should really give it a shot. And hey, you know what? NAHreally not only put out a pretty good remix project the same year, but as of apparently this past Friday, there is a new album. That might be worth giving a proper shot too. The second and final EP on this list, but I would be insane not to include it. Nourished by Time proved here that not only was Erotic Probiotic 2 not a fluke from last year, but that in signing to XL would not short-circuit his creativity or eclectic flair, blending 80s freestyle with shaggy hypnagogic pop and wry, but kind of romantic blends of socio-political observations. Hey, you know what? Kit Sebastian did something somewhat similar. Nice touch there. Here the budget feels kind of punched up in order to add more gloss to the arrangements and synths, but that's just adding sparkle to an already excellent atmosphere, and the only complaint that's really lasted for me with this project this year is that it's not longer and we don't have more. Can't wait for that proper album. It's gonna be special. I know it. Now, on the flip side of any critique of a project being too long, we got this behemoth from Paysage, where normally they serve as solid but utterly frigid textural experiences and only sporadically evolve beyond that. But I think this is easily his best in decades, with a tighter focus on melodic progression, driving groove, excellent transitions across the ambient passages and the wintry field recordings, and a more grounded thematic arc that you can kind of make out in the treacherous and impressively dark ascent, where it's best suited for late night brooding listens as the cold wind whips across your face as you're walking, or if you're sitting in a dimly lit room and thinking some uncomfortable thoughts. Even within black metal, it's kind of a tough sell, especially at the length, and I know to some of the purists this might not fully satisfy, but maybe it's just the chillier winter that has got for me this year. I kept coming back in order to make that ascent. And on the other side of any of that distortion, you get something very different that once again feels damn near prescient. Ekko Astral taking the meat of their punk foundations and striding straight into noise and no wave, ramping up the feedback in order to vivisect a world that is increasingly hostile to queerness, and then the leftist who would rather consume and proselytize than organize or fight, or hell, even just think that hard. And Ekko Astral are not about to make this easy on anyone. Not just the roiling cacophony and the ragged song structures, but the callouts of the Kafkaesque system of social climbers and disaffection that allows anyone to believe anything if the price is right. Hell, the fact that this band is from Washington, D.C., and this came out in election year, it does not feel like a coincidence. And while there's a lot of it that gets dark to the point of being a tough, borderline doom-scrolling listen, the underlying humanity, the desperate desire for community, that's why I kept coming back. We're gonna need to protect bands like Ekko Astral in the years ahead. Let's not make every single mistake that they've foreseen. Deceptively low-key and contemplative project, but one that I found rich and rewarding with every re-listen. The compiled EPs of an art collective exploring human purpose and nostalgia through pastoral folk music with subtle electronic augmentation and a kinda slightly uncanny psychedelia, where of course you're going to be left with more questions than answers, but also can't help but notice this searching echo throughout decades past. A little populism to have you wondering how often this path has been retraced. It's not quite a deconstruction, but also not quite a celebration of that pastoralism or nostalgia either. It confronts the reality that so much of this is symbology without purpose, bereft of meaning with the passage of time, heavens that are decaying as God appears to be elsewhere. Honestly, it's such a fascinating experimental album and a compilation that I've got no idea where Tapir is going to go from here, but if the journey is this intriguing, I think I might take that pilgrimage.
First name Marlena, last name Evans. Underappreciated, but I'm still the most respected. My insecurity is the fear of being rejected. When you this raw, they listen with an erection. Niggas pull the Drake before they rap about affection. There I go, hard to rap without a message.
I'll admit this fell back further on this list than I kinda like, mostly because I didn't really revisit as much as a whole the entire year, and some of the flaws in the production, the extended runtime, and the lyrical framing did start to wear on me a little bit. But that doesn't mean it wasn't great. Rapsody is a terrific MC who made her most bold and daring album to date, allowing herself to be flawed and questioning in a hip-hop environment that is not forgiving of black women doing that, especially when they're the sort of bruising lyricist who has to be hard that she is. But the issues she confronts are so grounded and very human, especially among family, that the arc of healing and repair and reconciliation really struck a chord across some of her most adventurous production to date as well as the acknowledgement that she could bar down any of her competition out of the room even as she wants to see other women actually succeed. And you know, while Glorilla's Glorious is not making this list, one of the last cuts I will add, I just kept thinking that that album and this are really just two sides of the same coin. It's utterly criminal the Grammys stayed away from this, despite being pretty much everything they like, and while Rapsody remains underrated, she deserves her flowers here. Great stuff.
Send help if you ever gonna help us. Send love if you ever did care. Send me a box of unlit matches and a bottle of Eagle Red.
I know this is technically the first time the band formerly known as Mike and the Moonpies has made this list. If I were making top 50s in 2019, Cheap Silver and Solid Country Gold would have clinched a spot handily, probably higher than this, but I do think Silverada earned their place regardless, taking their well-established Texas country bona fides and adding enough subtle Americana in order to flesh out their mixes, add some tasteful maturity to some of the writing, and then shred all the same. There's a lot of excellent extended jams balancing out with good hooks, and some really canny observations about aging and finding a place in a scene that's becoming more popular even as they've been there the whole goddamn time. Silverada might have a new name, but the foundation is still robust as hell. Maybe not my favorite from them, but absolutely worth your attention. This went underrated. Give it a shot. Another addition to this list, courtesy of Bandwidth, and what a terrific find it was. High Vis takes their painfully earnest UK hardcore roots and foundation, and then blows it into the stratosphere with production and hooks almost recalling 80s U2-esque post-punk, and then baggy and mid-90s Britpop, but also intensely of this time in the lyrics, the consideration of mental health, and the tangible precarious strain that comes of living under late capitalism, be it in the UK or worldwide. A shot of relief followed by pure adrenaline. Consider this filling the spot that Idols would normally have. They're not making this list either. And while I don't think High Vis has reached that height just yet, the fact they soared all the louder while not losing their spirit made this a thrilling discovery. This is a band that sounds like they can take the world by storm for all the right reasons. You feeling blessed?
One night lonesome cabaret, meet me down with a broken heart and stay. Lie together, tell me lies, baby, I don't mind. I ain't the hurting kind.
Yes, I am putting Orville Peck's sprawling collab album on this list, and no, of course it's not better than Bronco, but when it's stacked up with so many quality songs and guest performances, I find it very hard to care. It's better to take it like a singles compilation than an album with a consistent through line. Although, if there is one, it's how seamlessly Peck's stylism and chemistry provides the foundation for his co-stars, pulling them into so many neon-streaked queer stories, where Orville Peck just leaps across subgenres in country and soul and bluegrass, even Latin music. He finds unique charm in all of them. There's some excellent covers, nearly everyone commits to the bit. It's willing to get a fair bit darker than you might expect in some of the details, and it's often hilarious in so many little moments. This is a rodeo. I think it's worth the price of admission.
Back at that handful, ache and pain.
You know, Pony Bradshaw is such a great writer and painting vividly detailed and morally complex pictures of Appalachia that sometimes the music can feel too restrained for its own good to not get in the way of the lyrics. Well, in the conclusion of the trilogy, Thus Spoke the Fool is the first time in years where the songs maintained that organic texture but picked up more muscle and a wider scope, where the history and biblical apocrypha interweaving with the culture finally feels as immense as the weight on the souls of those who eke out a living in the Blue Mountains. I love the populist focus on difficult humanity, I love the moral ambiguity, and I love that the album feels as immediate and gripping as these stories deserve to be, but where we only saw glimpses on previous records of the trilogy of that power. It's definitely a difficult, kind of underrated and slept on album, but it's worth it.
If really wanted to bless me, would've left me that collection plate. If really wanted to bless me, would've left me that collection plate.
But you know, while we're on the topic of difficult albums and religion, I'll fully admit that I got to Ka's final album too late, and perhaps it deserves to be higher on this list, but I wasn't about to ignore Ka's thoughtful, complicated, and daring exploration of the relationship of black people with American Christianity, how such a religion, past and present, has existed and prospered alongside systemic racism and poverty, and then trying to find a solution amidst all of that, perhaps by pulling said faith closer to its place in organization and revolution, back to its roots, living according to the ideals that are actually preached in the gospel rather than the bastardization that's fit for prosperity. And of course, Ka did not mince words with plain spoken, but again, quietly clever wordplay, his rasp nevertheless reflecting a lot of urgency, and the production a cascade of gospel samples and activists highlighting every contradiction and every place where it could actually mean something more. One can only hope that Ka is able to rest with the peace and power he deserved.
A new mantra every other week. All my friends are finding new beliefs.
Yeah, somehow we're not escaping escaping religion here either, and the only reason Katie Pruitt is a little higher is because the hooks just go off. Mantras is a burlier listen in comparison with Expectations, at least in the front half, where she's still plenty introspective in confronting the failures of modern religion, but also the desire to find faith in something all the same. But the mixes and writing are louder, they're more confrontational, as if to highlight that it's not going to be remotely easy in going through all this. Now, it does feel more like a lateral movement than an outright improvement on that album. After the first two songs go so hard, one can't help but notice the softer contemplation doesn't quite have the same impact, but that kind of makes sense for a project that can ultimately leave you, again, with more questions than answers. For a project that is desperately looking for something to believe in, or even just the right routine in order to hold it all together, yeah, more incisive and potent than it'll get credit, and slept on by way too many. This year in particular, I'd hold on to this one.
She ain't never met no one who talk like that. And if you hang up on a nigga, bitch, I call right back. Wipe that silly grin, bitch, I'm really him. You better put them palms together, bitch, I really sin. No, me and crack don't share daddies, but we really twins. If she ain't got her shit together, she ain't getting in.
Tyler, the Creator, makes his best album since Cherry Bomb, and probably his most vulnerable since Goblin. Not only did I appreciate how he wildly leaps across textures in funk and soul and R&B and gospel and psychedelic rock and rap, but he uses it as a dizzying tableau that shows just how much his own braggadocious attitude and proclamations from the top, they can be their own mask hiding away his deeper insecurities, where his weirdness is not really translating to the wider audience that he wants. Some who want to keep him in a very narrow box, where he's also terrified of the consequences of growing older and winding up alone, and especially on a lingering and messy question about fatherhood that's tied to both his own absentee father and questioning what kind of father he could be. It feels like the apotheosis of everything that Tyler has been brooding on for about a decade now, sonically and thematically. And while I don't love every single pivot or mode of delivery, I couldn't escape the bangers and the most starkly compelling moments where Tyler, the Creator, finally encounters the uncomfortable parts of his life that he can't just bludgeon away with attitude and bass. And despite it all, that color really shines through. Fantastic work. I mean, there's a part of me that wants to highlight that this is Godspeed You! Black Emperor's best album in a decade plus, taking their formula of post-rock for a thunderous exploration of devastation and grief, observing human suffering and malevolence and trying to find something to hold on to on the other side, all the while delivering some of their best ever crescendos and the textural experiments in order to make one of the most powerful political pieces of this year without any words at all. But what makes it so much more stark is that the death count noted in the title has already been eclipsed twice over. And with the incoming administration down south and their full-throated endorsement of that genocide going even further, I'm not going to mince words with this, it's gonna get worse. And if you've been keeping in some of the protests going in the United States, expect the crackdown on you to be vindictive and brutal. Well, that hope feels all the more precarious. Godspeed albums always feel apocalyptic and both the end of an era or a revelation of something more. Even if there are elements that don't fully land, this is prophetic and affecting in a way that I just can't deny. And that's the first half of our list. Yeah, I know, ended on a bit of a downbeat note, but honestly, writing it was faster than I expected. But now on to the second half of this list, where I've got a little bit more to say. Number 25. I already highlighted The Cure as being one of the most startling comebacks of 2024, but it's not the only one. In fact, there are 3 more in different genres and subgenres that made this list. This is the one that probably got the least attention, but for those who know, it's easily the most surprising.
And I don't see the same. And letting go too fast. If you want a heartache to last, there ain't no time like the past.
The The fact we got a new Jamie Johnson album at all, 14 years after the guitar song, it's a minor miracle. The sort of project that feels like a curiosity to all but the die-hard indie country fans who have been memeing on the possibility of this album's existence for nearly a decade. But it's the sort of project that makes you feel like Jamie Johnson just never left. It's deeply rooted, slightly rock-inflected neo-traditional country music with his excellent voice and a weathered look at the world that's passing by and where he might possibly fit into it. It's kind of old, a little bit conservative in some of the edges, but never beholden to a reactionary angle, and that's kind of what gives it any little bit of charm. A bit slow-paced, more deliberate than anything, maybe even trending towards adult contemporary, but with a level of self-reflection on age and the process of the album's creation. Kind of reminds me of Dave Cobb's best work, and no surprise he produced here. Unlike The Cure, I don't expect another Jamie Johnson album anytime soon, but hell, if he's tired of it all, at least we got this. Number 24. Granted, there's a level of comfort with being able to eventually drop the long overdue comeback. Some folks are not that lucky. Their brand of storytelling will have to wind into weirder and more challenging places.
I'm here for all the love that I can stand. Take me to Critterland.
Despite the album's title implying a follow-through to the humor that underscored Willie Carlisle's last album, this is actually a much darker and more bleak experience. Like with Pony Bradshaw, there's this apocalyptic texture and detail to the systems left in decay and the people who are struggling within it. One of 3 albums with that theme in order to make the list. This is the second in that kind of lane and sonic direction, and the first with very strong queer themes as well. But Critterland feels more personally charged and ragged, especially in the questions around family, chosen or otherwise, and many a death in the wake. Drug use and drug abuse is another prominent theme, and the complexities in which Carlisle examines both dealers and addicts gives this album a gravitas to the extended spoken word final track. And yet it's still a great listen. It's dark and difficult, but the hooks are here amidst the minimalist production. Willie Carlisle's sense of empathy is so captivating and pulling you into those stories, making them feel so real. It likely flew under your radar this year. Make the arrangements. Check this out. Number 23. I'm a bit surprised this wound up so high on my year-end list, especially as I always feel a bit at a distance to this duo given the density of their work. Hell, I would have covered their album in 2022 if I hadn't gotten lost in the shuffle, or actually had gotten the lyrics. Let's correct some mistakes.
Peace, peace, star child of Dr. Alma here. Smoke too much, confused Herschel and his Walker air. Star killer like a table read for the one sincere. Battle was a bludgeon in the basement versus Joe Clear.
There's a confrontational weirdness to Shrapnel that, despite being on Backwoods, isn't quite reminiscent of acts like Arm & Hammer, so much as the Anticon and Def Jux acts of decades past, with a deliberately constructed artistry that's careening through references to sports, nerd culture, wrestling, and the ever-present specter of violence, with Controller 7 stacking the deck and delivering some ridiculously weird yet melodic production that nevertheless finds ways in order to stick in your mind, and I did not expect that. And I love the staking of claims, taking one's place, daring for all comers, not so much lurking in the darkness, but leaping down, swinging a hammer, as Curly Castro's delivery only gets more hungry and visceral, with Premrock as the measured counterbalance that's really needed, balancing out the aggression with its contemplation of meaning, but also the acknowledgement that there's little point overthinking this too long when the industry is looking to bulldoze everything anyway. Even if you don't always win this way, it's better to hold on, go down swinging, defending what is yours. You're not planning on leaving. This had shocking longevity for me, especially this summer. It's only kept growing on me. Easily Shrapnel's best work to date. If you're looking for some of the most challenging hip-hop you can hear this year, this is what you're looking for. Number 22. I don't know whether to be annoyed or faintly amused by some of the irony implied with this album's title. Because on the one hand, shows versatility, that he could play in so many different lanes where you almost wonder why he has not seen more mainstream success. And then you get very annoyed because if you're gonna play the algorithm, at least one of these songs should have struck gold.
Love won't let you know that it hurts when it's broke. Shine in the pain
This was the leap that I was really looking for Lucky Day to make. He's always been a really good songwriter in R&B, and his Table for Two project is a really nice late 2010s conceptual experiment. I wish I had reviewed it at the time, but Algorithm shows that for as much as he can write behind the scenes, he's just as capable of drawing it all together in order to make something of his own that feels like it's his. I do think the concept's a bit shaky overall and the pacing's kind of uneven, but when you bring so much R&B, funk, and soul flair across some dynamite individual songs, sometimes you got enough that's gonna win out regardless. And hey, if we're not gonna get all those other R&B acts that might have this sound in order to play the Algorithm and deliver, I prefer Lucky Day step up with a great project, terrific instincts, and some of the best songs of 2024. I don't think he's ever gonna get the push that he properly deserves. I'm blaming RCA and their criminal mismanagement of so much R&B talent, but in the meantime, the truth about algorithms is that they give you more of what you are seeking to find, and I sought out some greatness, and I got it. Number 21. This is one of those albums that wildly oscillated for me all year. Originally, it was near the top of this list. At some points, it fell back because it was a tough re-listen, and I couldn't really justify it in comparison with the absolute best. But for the third entry of singer-songwriters from the ragged brink and who infuse a lot of their queer storytelling with familial heartache, Alinda Segarra, they really deliver.
Well, it's a hard morning, it's just begun to rise. Here's a silver spoon so you could gouge out both your eyes.
The return to country that felt less like a trend and more like coming home in a world where such concepts feel all the more precarious. There's a part of me that still gives the edge to the Navigator in their catalog, but The Past Is Still Alive was the Hooray for the Riff Raff album that combines a lot of the personal and immediate with a much sharper texture and some of their best ever hooks. Segarra has always been acutely aware of how one's place will shape who they are, and the desperate train-hopping poverty and drug abuse and outcast subcultures whose stories that they desire to craft in context of a world where their situation might be better now, but once you've lived at the bottom and you've seen the brutal structural inequality, you can't stop seeing it. And when you pair it with the emotional instability that comes with loss, both intimate and much larger, where things only seem to be getting worse, yeah, there's a reason this went back up my list, and I don't think anything is gonna stop them now. Number 20. So here's the next comeback. I get the feeling it shouldn't have taken so long, but I respect a man for choosing to experiment, venture out of his comfort zone, even if it didn't really work. But it also leaves the question that if this was sitting in the can the entire time, we couldn't have gotten it sooner?
That's how I'm feeling. That's how I'm feeling right now. That's how I'm feeling. That's how I'm feeling right now.
I go back and forth on whether this is Jack White's best album, and yes, I include the White Stripes years. Both Blunderbuss and Lazaretto have aged a little bit weirdly, even if I think they both wound up growing on me a bit in a decade plus. But when it comes to scuzzy, meat and potatoes garage rock full of hollering blues intensity, Jack White proved he can still knock it out of the park. With a nice bit of metatext in how this album is searching for that euphoria, and then he plays every artist, institution, and a huckster that's selling it. That's why it's called No Name, getting a little bit cheeky in order to spite those who would commodify it, despite the album being sold from Jack White's own label. I mean, it's kind of tough to add a lot more talking about this album. Sometimes stripping it down to the raw essentials is just what you need in order to find that spark, deliver banger after banger, reset that foundation. And you know, while I'm usually a bit reticent to praise someone going back to formula when they've preferred to experiment, if you take these hooks and you add a little bit more of that experimentation to the arrangements, I might be on board. In the meantime, kick ass! Number 19. I mean, it's not surprising this album made my list. I think the surprise will be it's so low, given how much critical acclaim I've given them. But I gotta be fair, and given the canon of what I would consider classics from them, this had the ambition, just didn't fully stick the landing. But don't make mistakes, it's still really special.
Nobody stays together. This is where the world's turned. This is where the world's turned.
this point, I think Marianas Trench should just stop playing the Canadian radio game and just make whatever the hell they want. In this case, a progressive pop rock epic deeply rooted in Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, until you realize the main face is Josh Ramsey contemplating his legacy and retracing many steps on albums we've all seen before. Again, I'm a little bit reticent to prop up acts who are merely knocking their greatest hits out of the park, which is where I think the greatest thematic resonance will come through again on Haven, but we're also dealing with the best voice in modern pop rock with stellar arrangements, huge hooks, and the conceptual boldness to at least try for those bigger ideas and actually kind of stick the landing. I'd call it transitional if I had the belief we're getting another Marianas Trench album within a year or two. I'd love to hear them make more niche or progressive or theatrical endeavors. Ramsey certainly has the talent to realize it, but in the meantime, Haven is glorious, cinematic, epic, insert all appropriate synonyms for those words right there, and if rock music like this had a shot in hell at the charts, I think we'd all be better off. Just saying. Number 18. This wound up a little higher than I thought it would be, but the more I kept going back to it all year, the more I was convinced that in terms of hip-hop that was loose, quotable, genuinely funny while having a real edge, this story was something special.
I wonder if they could tell I'm a dope boy. My first toy was a scale, I had no choice. Money talk, I had no voice. My mom was gone, I had no joy. I wonder if they could tell I'm a dope boy. On second thought, don't tell, I'm a dope boy.
This was precisely the leap I wanted Bruiser Wolf to take, and it was so great to see him not only expand his production and his flavorful punchlines that nimbly run up to the edge of good taste, and then leap right clear past it, but also bring in great guest verses and a more mature, brutally realistic angle to a lot of his hustling bars. They're not ideally where he would want to be, actually doing that hustling, but what can you do but deliver those moments and keys with style and flair? And while I was tempted to put this album on the list on humor alone, the reason it is so high is because of the quotables. Not just the plentiful hooks, but the goofy absurdity that evokes such stark mental images, you couldn't help but examine every line for every nugget of wit. What thrills me about Bruiser Wolf is how, despite having an abundance of personality, he didn't let himself get pigeonholed with only one production palette or style, or just operate on punchlines alone. And even with this expansion, I still hear so much more room to grow. What can I say? When the dope is this good, you gotta keep buying. Number 17. I don't know if it's going to be contentious that this album is on my list. Granted, it's been tough to ascertain where the backlash currently is with this artist, especially as someone who is on social media and has only observed the water kind of getting muddier from all sides. But maybe that's why this stuck so strongly for me. Not that he knew it was coming, but knowing himself this felt inevitable, and this kind of feels like the result.
Where the bets are tough and bartenders meet the great American bar scene.
As someone who tends to think Zach Bryan makes better EPs than albums, I'm comfortable calling this easily his best album to date, his most refined and well-produced, at least by country standards, featuring some of his best ever songs. And yet dig even a little bit below the surface and you find a profoundly restless and angry album, still racked by grief at his mother's passing and pronounced survivor's guilt post-discharge from the military as he ascends higher in the music industry and really does not like what he sees. No clear answers or respite amidst hazy bar rooms, bad fights, alcohol abuse, and time that's going way too fast. This is Zach Bryan at his most revealing and least likable, where even after the fallout of this fall, none of it surprised me. All the signs were on the record. All that's left is to hope that something can be salvaged and built up down the line. I don't know if we're gonna get another Zach Bryan album anytime soon. I kind of don't have high expectations on that, or if anyone's gonna care on the other side when he eventually puts it out. But if this is closing time, at least it's a night worth remembering. Number 16. But while we're on the topic of emotionally damaged men making messy, complicated projects that are probably among their best to date,
You must have heard about me. Everyone knows my name. Everyone knows I'm holy.
I'm gonna say it. I think I like this more than any Black Midi album. And hell, part of it is how the new sound feels like something so overflowing with ideas and character and deranged pathos that it just bowls over everything in its path. This is where I have to remind you that the last Black Midi album literally took place in hell. But the new sound is kind of tougher to handle. The production is chaotic, but amazingly textured and loaded with progressive melodic flair. The grooves are wild. Jordy Griep is putting on a theatrical performance for the ages, all telling the story of some of the sleaziest men imaginable, where for as frequently sweaty, gross, and horrific as their exploits are, there is this level of warped romance and tightly focused empathy that demands you get closer to all of it than you might like, to men of power and privilege rendered puerile and pathetic, where they get what they think they want, but never what they should want or really deserve. The album splits the difference between spellbinding, revealing, and just plain disgusting, and yet I could not stop thinking that it's masterful in the end. It's a tour de force, and worth hearing. Number 15. But let's flip to the other side of the gender binary, find a writer with just as much flair and vocal personality, with a little bit more self-assured grace, and knew that it was time to swing for the fences.
Hey, fever's knocking at your door. You can feel the dogs lying on your floor. Took all your gold from your twisted door. I can drop you crazy, yes I can.
This felt like the year where Sierra Farrell properly broke out of indie country into the big leagues, with the eclectic stylism, the endlessly charming production texture, and the huge hooks to match. It's pure camp, but when it's this much fun, who the hell cares? I've always had a fondness for some of the Celtic folk elements that creep into the far edges of country and bluegrass, and Sierra Farrell just winds them into this wildly colorful extravaganza full of heart and hope. The hooks, they're terrific. The stylistic blend is kind of patchwork still, but it's better integrated. The production has taken a dramatic leap forward, and while there's still plenty of shaggy edges here, Sierra Farrell has made them her own. It's a little bit silly, and more than a few times you think she's leading you into a holler where all manner of insanity and weirdness might occur, but if you're along for the ride, you're gonna find something truly special. She can drive you crazy, and you'll love it all the way. Number 14. And you know, speaking of slightly mad women who can capture a certain type of romance, especially for me this year.
Running with my dress unbuttoned, screaming, but daddy, I love him. I'm having his baby. No, I'm not, but you should see your faces.
This was the year it felt like the internet got properly sick of Taylor Swift, right at the same point that I think any charitable interpretations of her music went out the nearest window, alongside any acceptance of complicated and morally ambiguous framing on Taylor Swift's most emotionally tangled, vibrant, and metatextual album to date. And while there is a part of me that feels thoroughly vindicated that many of my observations around Taylor Swift bore so much fruit in her writing, truth be told, I don't need the victory lap, and at this point, neither does she. More than ever, Taylor Swift should be aware that taking some time off is probably the best thing possible, especially with the conclusion of the Eras tour, given the frustration and venom that she has for Taylor Swift Incorporated at this point, including some of the fans. If she wants to preserve more of her sanity, that would be very smart, but this is also an album that's not about making smart, considered decisions, so much as making the one choice for your heart and hoping against hope that it actually works as the modern idiot. And for Taylor Swift, it ultimately doesn't. And it leads to this pensive echo on what all this tortured poetry actually means by the very end. Coupled with some of her boldest production choices to date and some truly wild swerves, this was the mainstream pop album for me to beat this year, and none came close. And while I think we'll probably get the self-titled and Reputation re-release the Taylor's versions this year, I think that's a story for another day. Number 13. I don't often talk about my process when I construct an album review, which is a little wild given the thousands that I've made, but of all of them, especially in 2024, this was the one where I felt like the only way to truly process is what this is. It was cruelty. You cut where you know it bleeds. And I could be callous and say that he had it coming, that he was asking for it, just not in the way you might.
I had to get on my pop shit, I don't wanna start shit. These rappers is regular food. I put my bitch in compartment, she thinking in cartman, she ain't fuck no regular dude. Say that.
It's not surprising that JPEG Mafia went rap rock and was confrontational as all hell towards those he didn't like, or a lot of what he did in late 2023, early 2024, myself included as one of those people. What surprised me was that how in ripping the curtain away for the mingled blend of fury at his audience, contempt for the industry, hatred for his peers, and an emotional breakdown long in coming, Peggy wound up revealing the humanity that had me realize nothing I could say would hurt him as much as he is hurting himself. And maybe that was the impression I was supposed to get, kind of in order to sidestep critique of the album's failings. I certainly don't think it's his best when LP, Scaring the Hose, maybe even Veteran exist, but this was a project about lighting oneself on fire and then tackling everyone you see before you become ash. It's blistering and kinetic and callous and genuinely insightful about those who would try to commodify his humanity while sparing their own culpability. Oh, and it bangs like you would not believe with some truly inspired sampling. The more I reflect on Future's shadow across this project, the more the creeping nihilism adds some horrifying dimension, and then it's gonna rip your heart out. No jokes, on the other side of this, I actually hope JPEG Mafia got paid for what he did on a project that's really not worth naming or having that dignity of being mentioned in this video, but if I keep it real, I just hope JPEG Mafia is okay. My God. Number 12. Okay, one more quick observation about that project I don't care to name, and I still have not listened to it in full. The marketing kept trying to evoke a lot of black metal for the edginess and the provocation and all manner of gross dog whistling. And as someone who is actually a black metal fan, it was kind of painful, but also a firm reminder that if I wanted to show someone something a lot better, 2024 was not short of great examples. For instance... There's not a ton to say more about the newest Alcest album beyond it being one of NAHreally's best in around a decade. The stunning arrangements, the pure ear candy in the melodies, the gorgeous vocals, full of textured, winsome brilliance that would be blinding if it wasn't so full of heartfelt yearning for transcendence and a deeper connection, even if that gulf might be too wide. If anything, what it represents is Alcest nailing that precise balance between roaring, titanic black metal and the shoegaze that they've been straddling for years, with the thicker bass lines underscoring the stylistic fusion instead of more of a juxtaposition. It's utterly gorgeous, a project I didn't always return to, but one where I was thrilled and reinvigorated every time. The Fash are not going to stake claim to great art in this genre. The light can burn away that darkness, and we'll be better for it. Number 11. This was the biggest surprise for me in 2024. Not only that it was a great comeback, the last of them here, not only was it a return to form that for over a decade I just had no reason to expect, it just kept getting better. And while it didn't get a lot of attention, even within its niche in rock, oh god, I needed this.
Everything's here and nothing's lost. As long as you don't give up on us, give up on
I've been a big Snow Patrol fan since the mid-2000s, damn near 20 years. I saw them live opening up for Coldplay in 2009. I'd argue they were better than Coldplay were that night. I never thought they got the proper critical consideration they deserved because they were defiantly uncool at the crux point of being accessible piano rock, adult alternative, and emo, so naturally they became most known for the power ballads, and those were never cool. And sure, The Force is the Path has some of those moments, and they are legit beautiful, finally refining some of the electronic pop experimentation of their 2010s into more of a palatable form, but pairing it with the riffs and the hooks and the muscle that Snow Patrol's always had at their best, with Gary Lightbody nailing that dramatic intensity in his vocals, but it's the writing that felt special. Non-linear in the approach to relationships within time, capturing atomized moments of white-hot passion and emotional complexity without the easy answers. There's this naked passion that infuses these songs, dares a man who hasn't loved in so very long to wish for possibilities again. The only way through it is the forest. It's the path. I mean, I can't imagine this album making many other lists. Who the hell is checking for a new Snow Patrol album in 2024? But if you want something that is on par with their absolute best, where everything's here, nothing's lost, it's this. Number 10. Another extremely late entry here. Honestly, I should have covered it in the summer. I could have used it. But if you're looking for when Screamo is going to show up on this list... What can I tell you? When the guitar work is this striking, when the band can balance out those visceral screams with genuine beauty in both the melody and the poetry, when the music almost becomes an argument for itself amidst the pervasive emptiness where daring to dream can feel like a fool's errand, you're gonna find something truly special, and State Fault's really delivered. Easily their best and most expansive album, their first in 5 years. This was the sort of Screamo that had me coming back way more than I thought I would. It's so ridiculous consistent in quality, it can kind of be tough to find standouts amidst all the gleaming beauty. I was way late to this one. I know a lot of folks missed out on that review when I filmed while I was on vacation. I know it's still going to be a niche listen. Still something special. You should hear it. Number 9. It can feel kind of weird to be on the outside when it comes to certain fan bases, where you like the same act, but often for reasons or albums the rest of the fan base doesn't. Where you might be lukewarm on what gets all the attention and acclaim, but overjoyed at something that's considered a lesser venture. Now, thankfully with this album, I think I'm a little bit closer in being in alignment.
Dream state.
Kelly Lee Owens returned to pop and house on a new label, and she stacked up the hooks for days, taking all the production hallmarks she had honed on her ambient projects and giving that striking texture and impeccable balance to her best collection of songs to date. And when you paired that with her voice sounding all the more expressive and moving, and songwriting that allows the heady passion to swell up from the dance floor to then process what it's like to have some of that trust and love betrayed but still keep believing in more, I think it's spellbinding. The mix can finally match the emotionality on display. It's thrilling. Pair that with a ridiculous sense of consistency, really tight sequencing, it's Kelly Lee Owens finally delivering on all of her potential. A dream in which I don't want to wake up. Thrilled to get this. Fantastic work. Number 8. There's a part of me a little bit uncomfortable with this album showing up on so many lists, especially for the year end. It feels like kind of performative, more emblematic of the year the artist had rather than discussing the music. So when I say this is probably Kendrick Lamar's best album since To Pimp a Butterfly, I'm looking to have a different conversation.
All I ever wanted was a black Grand National. Fuck being rational, give them what they asked for. It's not enough. Few solid niggas left, but it's not enough. Few bitches that'll really step, but it's not enough. Say you bigger than myself, but it's not enough.
I said on social media after my first listen to GNX that a lot of the conversation around the album was probably gonna bother me, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened, putting even aside the Stan bullshit, where the album is framed as a victory lap, but there's so much more going on with where Kendrick wants to take the culture. I've seen well-meaning people dismiss the project because it's not as sophisticated as Kendrick at his best, but if you peel through the layers, there is cultural idiosyncrasies and thematic depth that some rap fans seem to be allergic to hearing coming from the West Coast. I've also seen a lot of critics think that this is the story of a sore winner, who think that the entire album is just circling around the beef, unwilling to engage with the street level consequences that actually come with those sorts of rap feuds, and not only how Kendrick Lamar is still sifting through the wreckage emotionally and otherwise, but he also wants to build something to last and be better in its stead. And it's also easily the most loose, freewheeling, and dare I say fun and funny album that Kendrick's ever released in his entire career. The production's note perfect for it, the bangers go off, and a lot of the guests found themselves kind of growing on me. The last of which is why I don't like branding this as a mixtape or a throwaway album. If you're what the culture's feeling, giving space for come up within the culture can be truly special, and does belong on the album proper. Now, I do think we're going to get more music from Kendrick soon, given that he's now away from TDE, but I don't think the quality is going to degrade. I don't think it degraded with this. When you put yourself on top, you get held to a higher standard, and I'm really looking forward to what comes out next, because this drives and goes so hard. Number 7. But switching from someone at the top of the industry to someone much more obscure, even in her genre, you can tell when someone is delivering the most ambitious album of their career. And while country tends to be short on concept albums, 2024 we got one for the ages.
But you're falling apart, baby, aren't you falling apart? He said bring a black jacket and a red guitar.
It's Karen Jonas's best work, but also her most bold and daring, a tableau exploring the timeline of American kitsch and culture in both what it represented to the American dream, what generations aspired to buy and claim for themselves, to where it can feel faded and tacky, and yet still have meaning. And while the production is elegantly sprawling and organic as hell and capturing that vintage texture, the diversity in these compositions, with Jonas's gorgeous voice selling all of it, including the moments where that dream and romance can be twisted or deranged or just desperately sad, the writing and structure of this project is a tour de force, where it would be so easy to make the more direct assault on consumerism, but Jonas leaves much of that in the background for those who are paying attention, until she gradually has that bottom fall out. Let the tragic darkness slowly come into view, but also framed never to cast direct blame or absolve herself of culpability. Every indie country fan that's heard this has been championing the album all year, and even if you're not in that group, still worth a lot of attention. It's special. Number 6. It's a funny coincidence that this album just so happened to come out on the same day as G and X by Kendrick Lamar. It's even funnier that it's better.
All is silence, and in the next universal dawn.
I don't know if Father John Misty's ever gonna beat I Love You Honey Bear, which I think is a seminal 2010s indie classic. I don't think that's a contentious statement at all. But Mahashmashana is a really close second, mostly as it feels like the culmination of the higher concept societal examinations going back to pure comedy in 2017, but now feeling within the eye of that storm. Josh Tillman's always been really funny and willing to be the butt of the joke, but this time the stakes of the jokes feel higher, dare I even say sincere. And when you pair that with easily his most expansive and experimental production to date, leaping across glorious 70s singer-songwriter material to garage and boogie rock, even noise rock, and having one of the best voices in this genre, if this is what it sounds like to cleanse and burn it all down, I want to hear what the Phoenix says rising from the ashes. Yes, he got overshadowed in the moment by Kendrick. That's a tradition that goes back over a decade, but at least for me, this wound up mattering more. Number 5. One thing I've come to know about my top albums, I value consistency a lot. You can have moments that'll take you over the top, but if I can listen to your album back to front and never even consider touching that dial, you've unlocked something truly special. And it's all the more important when you've got something like a comfort listen and a criminally underrated and overlooked album at that.
Life is all about timing. Love is wild and blinding. Every road is winding. So let the good times roll.
Okay, I'm gonna rant a bit. I legit have no idea why folks were not talking about Flyin' by Wade Bowen this year. Yeah, it's self-produced, but it's his best work by leaps and bounds. It's incredibly warm and organic Texas country with a ton of homespun flair, balancing out the anthems with the tearjerkers. He got Troy Aikman of the Dallas Cowboys, one of the most recognizable announcers in the NFL, in order to introduce a song. Was nobody paying attention to that? Maybe people gave more attention to that fourth Hold My Beer project with Randy Rogers and just kind of overlooked this in the meantime. But since I've been covering Wade Bowen for nearly a decade ago, this feels like the culmination. It's easily his best album, epitomizing everything that's made him a star in Texas country. With a project that is so consistently stacked, it becomes kind of work on my end to find the flaws or missteps. I have the feeling that among certain indie country fans looking back on 2024, which wasn't precisely a great year for country, they're going to be kicking themselves for missing out on this, and they should be. Phenomenal work. Number 4. You know, I knew after last year, after this act was introduced to me as Spectrum Pulse Core, that this artist was primed for great things. The writing, the vocal talent, it was just that strong. And even then I did not expect this.
In front of men built like wire, thrilling the sick leave, vainglorious men, fulfilling as a dry heave.
The Way I Can Sell a Firmer Hand by Hamish Hawk is saying it's peak Morrissey without all of the, well, Morrissey of it all. Gothic and literate and queer, commanding the room, with a run of dance-ready bangers balanced out by tumbling, sexually charged romance and heartache. Where I can call it the gayest album I have heard all year, and I mean that as the highest of compliments. But it's also so much more than shock value. Hamish Hawk is painstakingly introspective and questioning, not just around the politics of queer romance and how it gets commodified. It doesn't shy away from going into some very challenging places if you are LGBTQ, or if you just want to dance and vogue. He delivers in spades with so many great hooks. Hamish Hawk reminds me of British singer-songwriters of a different decade that could command the room with an utterly idiosyncratic style and poise, where you can definitely hear some of his inspirations, but he's able to spin them in a very modern fashion. Where some of y'all may have had a brat summer, this was my counterpoint, and it was glorious. Number 3. I don't want to call it a comeback, and it's always kind of tricky to compare someone's new work to a classic that's already in their catalog, so let me say this instead. When B. Dolan returned this year, I think this is the reintroduction we all needed.
Too many styles for me to engage a debate, y'all. Ain't in the same league, don't keep the same score. I seen the legends rock, I seen the greats fall. I watched them turn it all to fantasy baseball, fantasy baseball, fantasy baseball, fantasy baseball. But I ain't come to play with y'all. You never rated me, but then I kinda hated y'all. You never made my team in fantasy baseball.
Yeah, returning from a spinal surgery in the midst of a hellish time to be in any hospital, B. Dolan brought perspective and humor and a level of focused tightness on this project that still kind of leaves me in awe. It's less than a half hour. The song structures are streamlined with more groove than ever, but his writing still has layers and hooks, not just highlighting the difficulty in the recovery, but also the world that may have left him behind in the meantime, where navigating new, unfamiliar roads provides some difficult and different challenges, shouldering different weight and with all the complicated nuance that he would bring to match it. And yet his wry, layered observations feel more accessible than ever, a weathered examination of the struggle to live and persist in the world that is abusing and extracting humanity, the way to put it all on your back regardless, and how one can actually get through to the other side. For a long time, this was my rap album to beat in 2024. Feels like nobody gave it proper attention. Well, here's your chance. Catch up. Number 2. Alright, truth be told, as I said at the very beginning, there was a lot of stiff competition for my top album spot. So much so I was legit tempted to make it a tie for the first time ever. And what's telling is that both albums are doing much of the same thing in very different ways. A similar brand of wide-ranging systemic critique that doesn't shy away from the messy personal complexities, especially around masculinity and machismo. Both are incredibly consistent, loaded with more hooks than you would ever expect from those artists. Both feeling like a heavy emotional experience in order to process, aware of their own artificiality or theatricality and complicity within the system. And while I knew they always had it in them, the leap they took was more than I ever could have expected. So with that being said, my God, if there was a title that felt prophetic for parts of this year.
In the ghetto, I'm a Martian, crash landing. In them dirty ass apartments, stay shining. I forever be the hardest, big time. Like the niggas in New Orleans, real shining. Like the niggas from Magnolia, Chopper City in the ghetto, I'm a soldier. Where they at, get the gat, huh? Where they at, get the gat?
I think Vince Staples is acutely aware of how fragmented his fan base has become. You had those who are most enraptured by the crushing darkness of Summertime 06, the hipsters who wanted a lot more of the left field experimentation of Big Fish Theory, the even more of the hipsters who were looking for the West Coast bangers between FM and Ramona Park Broke My Heart, the last often feeling a little bit overlooked because the majority of folks never bothered to delve deeper into what Vince was saying. But as the guy who has long considered FM as Vince Staples' best and most underrated album, Dark Times is the natural expansion and his crowning achievement. Even in a year where he put out his own TV show, which was also great, the album feels immense, but it's West Coast to the very end, with production loaded with tight grooves and his best hooks. And that's where you factor in Vince Staples' humor and razor-tight wordplay and societal commentary, balanced out with a hard introspection of succeeding in a world where so many have failed, where he knows the real consequences of showing any kind of humanity in the streets, but he's also choosing to use it and see the bigger picture. There were a lot of promising West Coast albums in 2024, a lot of great ones. It was a great year for the region, but Vince Staples beat them all out handily. This was something special. And finally, number 1. You had told me 4 years ago this act would have my number 1. I don't know if I would have called you crazy. This band's gotten critical acclaim before, even if I never really got it to the same extent. But 2022 changed some of that as the band made the swerve towards alternative dance, some of their best ever hooks. But at the end of the day, this was a band. They made progressive rock. They were gonna have to aim bigger. Climb a new mountain.
Sorry, Satan, but I gotta do this evil on my own. I haven't left the house in nearly 30,000 days. I sent you the image of a little yellow face to tell you that I'm sad about the emptiness that's all around me. And I can't stop the ringing in your ears when everything we love becomes a picture of a simulation. It wakes me in the middle of the night. I love you like an atom bomb, but I become a cold reactor.
This is Everything's best album, and I don't think it's particularly close. Sorry, Get to Heaven diehards, but the balance of thematic complexity with the band's best ever melodic hooks, while still maintaining a lot of their experimentation, is utterly incredible. And I was not kidding about the parallels with Dark Times either. This is also a very ground-level examination of late capitalism and machismo, with a wild sense of humor and a deep introspective sadness that can feel impressively bleak. I mean, they just did it through a note-perfect expanded metaphor and concept that drags the current economic hellscape behind a woodshed and then garrots it and guts it like a fish. From the desperate, half-understood zealotry and actually building the mountain to the unkempt and less understood monsters that lurk within us at the very bottom of the pit, and then finally the self-obsessed, buffoonish paranoia that festers at the very top, playing every role in the story while trying to offer a scrap of hope. And they did it with insanely catchy hooks. I have been saying for years that progressive rock and progressive metal should not shy away from the choruses. They can bring a unique melodic complexity to bear that makes them feel all the more special. And Everything, they proved it, and they proved it in spades. I was turned around on this band with Raw Data Feel, I'll admit that, but Mountainhead feels titanic, the apotheosis of their best instincts. And as such, it's my top album of 2024. We can only hope this year to come will deliver as much, if not more. But in the meantime, well, you know what? We do what we can. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. It means a lot. Again, we'll drop your album list in the comments below. I guarantee none of them are going to match mine. We'll have to see. But beyond that, if you guys want to see more, if you guys have more to say, any comments on how I can improve my presentation, let me know down there below. And if you want to help support the channel, so as albums reviews start kicking up for 2025 and maybe other projects, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships are right over there and are highly appreciated. Get access to my Discord, access to my schedule, y'all know the works. And again, don't feel obligated. Tough times, if you couldn't tell from most of this list, but again, it would be greatly appreciated if you could. Beyond that, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.